You are listening to the Queens of Quality podcast. This podcast will discuss some of the basic and not so basic impacts of compliance and quality within the pharmaceutical and biotech industries. We have a balance of laughter and education as we discuss the misconceptions about quality assurance within an organization. We are your hosts, Jenn and Michelleanne. Let's get ready to start the show. Welcome back to the Queens of Quality. Today, we're going to talk about failure. Hi, Jenn.
Hi, Michelleanne. How are you?
I'm doing all right. How about yourself?
I'm doing well, thanks.
Excellent.
So here's my question. How many times today have you failed?
All of them.
Right.
All of the time.
I love this topic.
Yeah, this is a really good one. So, and the reason that we need to talk about failure is because we in this industry, and for those not in this industry, we have a high rate of failure. And I think that there is an expectation placed on us for only talking about the successes, but we need to talk about the failures.
Right. I agree with you because in my world, if I don't learn from my failures, I don't know what success looks like.
Yep.
So there is a lot of activity, a lot of resources, a lot of brain power, a lot of money that goes into the development, the study, and the launching of every product
Absolutely.
that is on the market. So I think understanding what we needed to go through to get there is really important for people.
So one of the phrases that I've learned in doing the research on this topic that I really like now is looking at the pharma industry from bench to bedside.
I love that. I actually haven't heard that before.
I think that one's cool. I used to talk about it in terms of bench to market, but I think that bench to bedside is far more appropriate.
Absolutely. Agreed. Yeah. I mean, and that's where it goes. It goes to the patient's bedside.
And that I find is more, it's more encompassing of our true goal here, which is public health and patient safety.
And to your point about, you bring something new to market. It's like, okay, well, it's not the latest iPhone or the latest app, or it's definitely something different in terms of the impact to the overall safety and well-being of patients and people's quality of life.
Exactly. So bench to bedside it is.
All right. I like it.
So let's talk about where we start at the bench.
Okay.
So we're going to be talking about the rates of failure and how many possible compounds does it take to get from just within the discovery and research and development part of this industry. What does it take to get from one stage to the next?
And just for those people who aren't in industry, the term is, how do you determine your target? And that's where, within this discovery phase, you go through a lot of different options. And we'll talk about the number in just a minute. You can evaluate these options in a variety of different ways. We are not going to cover all of those varieties today. There's just too many of them. There's things like high throughput screening, and you have, those 96 well plates where you just kind of push stuff through your system and it magically gives you information now. The technology has made that a lot more streamlined than it was 20 years ago, kind of thing, where you have to do them one at a time. So imagine going from one at a time to 96 at a time. Amazing. Yet you also get to know faster, which is kind of a good thing because you're not spinning your wheels trying to determine what that next target could possibly be. So again, there's lots of different ways to go about it. And ultimately you end up with your one target. And Michelleanne, how many did you go through in order to get there?
Oh God, so many. So that's part of the thing is we're going to go back to the number in just a minute. But what I want to emphasize here is you've got this new compound, and this is the operative word here. It may help to treat the disease. It may. We still don't know.
Okay, you ready for the number?
Yes.
I feel like we know. I should do a drum roll now.
Okay.
And the number is?
Ready?
No one knows.
There you go.
Because there's so many.
And we don't always keep track of all of the pieces that we thought we would be testing.
Correct.
So the only concrete numbers that we have are the ones that actually make it into the next piece.
Which is
And so
preclinical.
from that, we know that it is an estimated that 5 of 5,000 new molecular entities make it to the clinical testing phase.
And the phase they have to get through to go there is preclinical.
Yes.
Yeah. And that's where you talk about how would you potentially do some scale up? How do you support your clinical design? What kind of in vivo and in vitro data do you have to determine, efficacy, safety claims that you want to make to study in that next phase? So there really is a lot of other work to gather up those 5,000.
Yes. And you have the target validation, you have the compound screening, you have the lead organization, you have the preclinical testing, all of those parts that go into that.
Yep. And again, you get, the different phases of clinical development in and of themselves, if you break them down a little bit further, they all have timelines, So to get from your target evaluation, that discovery, all the way through to your potential first in human, and that 5 of the 5,000 that you've mentioned can take 5 to 7 years.
Yep.
Does that sound about right to get there? So, and again, you go through your patent processes, you go through all of your other activities, from a legal perspective, a business perspective, a funding perspective. You need to make sure you have the support, in order to move into that next clinical phase that you're talking about.
And that everything is documented.
And then there's, because you and I both know that if it's not documented, it didn't happen.
That is correct. We say that kind of mocking, but for real, if it's not written down, it didn't happen.
Yep. So once you get into the first in human stage, you want to talk about the numbers there in terms of the patients that are evaluated and the number of the success rate there too.
So depending on it, there are dependencies in all of these, right? Because it depends is one of our favorite things to say.
Agreed.
And everyone's least favorite thing to hear.
Sure.
So once you get into the first in human phase, you've already submitted your IND application to the FDA.
Assuming it's just US, yes.
Or to the other health authorities, depending on where. But since we are in the US, we are going to go with submitting your IND application to the US.
Yep.
So depending on what your indication is, your first in human trials may be healthy volunteers in a phase 1 center. And what you're looking for there can take multiple small trials, and that stage can also take a year and a half.
Right.
Because you have to write the protocol, get the data together. What is it that you're looking for? What do you want to see out of this? How are you going to collect that data? How are you going to present that data? So many questions, so many pieces. And this starts to take up more of the budget for it also.
Correct.
It seems like this would be where things start to flow easier. And I'm here to tell you that it's not.
It's true.
This is not where stuff starts to get easier.
Right.
This
Is any part of it actually easy? Okay,
No.
just checking.
Nope. Not
Nope.
easy.
Mm-hmm.
So this is where your rates of failure are going to really start to show up, because what if bad things happen to it in humans?
Right.
What if bad things happen to the humans?
Then you're done.
Then you're done. That is correct.
That target has officially failed.
So you have your phase 1 trials, can take about a year and a half. And what's your failure rate here?
Oh, the failure rate? Ooh. It's actually, so the numbers that I have actually say about 30%,
Yep, that sounds about right.
35.
So you've already spent, let's say that it takes, for sake of argument, let's say it takes 7 years to get it through preclinical, a year and a half to get it through phase 1, and 35% of all that work that's gone into this is now gone. It failed. It's not happening. So this is also why companies generally don't only have one in development. They'll have multiples in development. You're doing research on multiple pathways and multiple indications, because you've just spent your time, talents, and treasures, and 35% is just going to fail at this stage. But then maybe you make it to phase 2. So then what happens?
You spend more money and reevaluate your study goals and objectives and how you want to evaluate the data. You know, what are your critical success factors, essentially? So, and I know in another podcast, we're going to get into ICH E8, which requires quality by design be worked into your clinical study development. But again, that's another podcast.
So one of the things that I want to point out about going from phase 1 to phase 2 is I look at this as kind of a triangle. So you've got your point at the bottom and you're going up. So you've got first in human, and that's your bottom point of the triangle. And then as you go up in clinical trials, what you're doing is you're expanding the patient population that's taking part in the trials. And from a PV perspective, this is where you have an intersecting triangle going the other way. So basically what we're drawing here is like a Star of David. Because when you're looking at the first in humans from a PV perspective, you collect absolutely every sniffle, snot, tear,
Hiccup,
headache,
hangnail,
all of it.
Right.
You collect every single bit of it as possibly related until you can start to eliminate that.
Correct.
So the phase 2 part is going to take longer because, like I said, you've got more patients. You've removed some of the inclusion, exclusion criteria.
Right.
You've loosened that up a little bit. So phase 2, you have about 2.5 years to do more of this. And again, you're piecemealing it in.
Right.
You know, how is the study designed? How is the information being collected? Where is this all going? Phase 3 is the next stage bigger.
So in phase 1, you're talking from like tens and maybe 100 people participating. Actually, even 100's a lot.
I was going to say, yeah.
Yeah. So, you know, in phase 1, it's tens of people, you know, in phase 2, it's hundreds of people, phase 3, it's generally thousands of people. And please know that these are gross generalizations.
Yeah.
I can't be clear about that because, again, it will depend on your therapeutic area and that type of thing. So
there are huge dependencies there.
Exactly. So I just want to be, for our listeners, please know that this is a gross generalization and it does vary drastically by therapeutic area. So we're not going to get into that kind of segmentation here.
And phase 3 trials, like, it doesn't mean that there's a single phase 3 trial that has 1,000 participants. It's that there are multiple phase 3 trials, and the totals across the phase 3s
Right.
would be 1,000.
Yeah. And that's when
Because
you hear people talk about clinical programs. Usually a program has multiple trials associated with it.
Yes, because nobody wants to be the project manager on a phase 3 1,000-person clinical trial.
That's a lot.
I was going to say that was supposed to be funny.
I was like, I'm having like heart palpitations just thinking about it. That's why I'm not laughing.
So then you've done all this work, and we're down to, this is the final stretch, right? So you've got it. Now we're through phase 3 programs, and we're going into, presenting the NDA briefing book. And
Well, it's cute that you think that we're in the final stretch.
it's just for the purpose of this podcast. In real life, this
Okay.
is so fast.
Got
It's
it.
not even funny.
Gross generalization. Got it.
Yeah, no. And then, it's still going to take another probably 2 years. The chart that we have says 1.5 years from approval to launch. And
That's
the
getting
pace on
longer
that
and longer.
the pace on that is frenetic. And it's absolutely like, no, we're not doing that. It's super fast. And, part of the point here is that what we have seen from clinic, so we talked about the drug development process being time consuming, and how it's of 5,000 new molecular entities are developed, only 5 make it to clinical testing. And then how many of those 5 do you think make it to FDA approval? The
Not
answer to
even
that,
one.
well, no, it's actually 1.
Well, okay.
1
Yeah.
in 5 of those makes it to approval.
Right.
Because it's a total of roughly 12% of drugs that make it to the clinic are approved.
So that math doesn't add up
No, it does.
because 1 in 5 is 20%.
I said roughly.
Gross generalizations.
Well, because if you look at different sources, different places say different things.
Yeah. I mean, and that's where, again, it becomes really challenging to get consistent data because of how things are reported. And then how the business activities that are associated with it. And when I say that, it's more that, oh, well, this company got bought by that company. And then, okay, how does it get tracked essentially in terms of the overall number of entities that are being evaluated through the course of time.
Yep.
So, and, to your point, we spent, I think we said 7 years, again, gross generalizations, easy math type of thing. It takes roughly 7 years to go from bench to clinic. And then it takes another 7 to 9 to 10 years, depending on the situation, to go from clinic to application. So that's where, again, it depends on how long your programs are running and how robust your data is and how many different studies you need to do, type of thing. Because I mentioned earlier that, you have tens of people in phase 1 and, hundreds of people in phase 2. So when you're talking about thousands of people and the time it takes to recruit all of them, that's a lot of your time spent in the evaluation phase, for phase 2, for phase 3, because it takes so long to recruit thousands of people to participate in your study. And
then there are all of those other, so we said that we were going to talk about failure, right? How many points of failure do you think you have with adherence to study drug, compliance with study drug?
I can't count that high Because to your point, it's getting, whatever number that is, it's exponentially associated with the number of people in your trial.
Yep.
And then you have, people who don't come back. And actually I've been working with a client, and they did an initial screen for phase 1. They did an initial screen of 30 people. And when it came time to start the study, they were really hard pressed to ensure that 12 people showed up. So that's more than half you've lost for whatever reason.
As an auditor,
Mhm.
when I do audits of clinical sites, that's always one of the things that I look for in protocol deviations is
Mhm.
adherence to study drug. And in my years of doing this, I have had, and I had to include it in the audit report because I was so impressed. I have had one study come back where there was 100% compliance with study drug.
Really?
Yep.
Even that one I would have questioned.
I did question it.
Because, we're talking about failure here.
I know. And
Right.
that's why I had to include it in the
Mhm.
study report, because I was so floored that there was that high an adherence rate. And that sent me down a different rabbit hole because it was it was a children's oncology study.
Sure.
And so the parents were very vested in the children adhering to the study.
Yeah.
So then it makes a little bit more sense.
It does. I was going to say, as soon as you said it was child pediatric, you could just stop there. It's like, okay, that's why it's 100%. Yeah, that makes a lot more sense.
So given the success rates and the failure rates, I think that when we look at like the cost of a drug,
Mhm.
we need to take a look at that piece of, yes, this one drug has been successful and has made it to market, and we can calculate what it takes to break even or make a profit on this drug, and the number of failures that it took to get the one success.
Get there. Yeah. I mean, and the term that they use in business school is widgets. It doesn't, so essentially it doesn't matter what you're making when you talk about the cost of production and sales and research and design and all that kind of stuff for other widget. Think of the things I'm looking at, my computer screens, my coffee mug, and my microphone. Those are all widgets.
Okay.
The number and cost of failure to create those things, I'm going to say, is significantly less.
Yes.
Than what it took for the pharmaceutical industry to bring a product to market.
Absolutely.
So that's where, to your point, to quite literally have to account for all of the other time, money, and resources that were spent in those failures. That's where that reinvestment comes into play. Of being able to go with the next product. And you mentioned it earlier, it's why a lot of companies, if not every, I can't say every company, why a lot of companies have more than one product in their pipeline, because you have to balance that all, through essentially the 12 to 15 years it takes to bring a product to market.
Absolutely.
I saw a really interesting, I'm a visual person, so I like graphs. I saw a really interesting graph where, a lot of really interesting ideas and a lot of the innovation comes from academia.
Yep.
And those types of institutions. And the number of entities that made it to market, as well as actually even into phase 3, solely based on, or solely going through academia over the last, actually, I don't even know what the time frame was. Essentially, the number was 0.
Oh, really?
Yes, because most institutions, like academic institutions, they don't have the buying power, or the the budget to be able to truly be able to do a phase 3 study. Because
I
you
can
just need,
totally see that.
so essentially what happens is that they partner with the industry and those numbers go up significantly
Nice.
to the point of where something coming from academia, it reaches NDA or BLA, depending on the situation, over 85% of the time.
Wow.
So that's where, again, having that partnership and innovation that occurs, not just within the pharmaceutical industry, but outside of it as well from academics is really important too, because they're feeding the pipelines as well.
And I've seen where academia and institutions, well, academia and industry have worked very well as collaborators.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And I also wonder if it's not just a matter of the resources, but if it's also a matter of the institution, the knowledge, because there are more people on the industry side who have the knowledge about how to navigate through the system, through the approval process, through the submission process to the agencies. Because I have worked with people in academia who it's like their first time ever in clinical trial, and things look very different from an academic perspective than from an institutional perspective.
And that's where, it's that whole idea of it takes a village.
Yes.
And, I've mentioned before, there are certain things you don't want me doing. I'm a quality and compliance person, especially working with people in PV. I've had people say, oh, well, if you do like a medical evaluation or the coding, I'm like, no, that is not my skill set. I am not a medic. I don't play one on TV, the whole 9 yards, and in the same respect, I'm not a finance person. I'm a scientist.
Right.
And even that we can further segment, so that's where, again, to your point, it takes a lot of different knowledge and skill sets in order to truly bring it forward from that development or the academic environment into industry as well.
Yes.
And ultimately to the bedside, as you indicated earlier.
And I really do love that part.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Because in spite of all of the points of failure that are possible, we have seen tremendous and amazing progress within this world of pharma and biotech.
Right.
And device.
Correct.
And vaccine.
Yeah, it's funny because I've always bucketed vaccine under BLA.
Right.
Type of stuff. And that it's its own, essentially it's its own entity now, its own segment now.
Yes.
I think. Yeah. You don't do a separate or a unique application name, but really in terms of the specialization of it. It's a new way of looking at that segment of the market, I think.
But I look at all of this and I look at all the potential points of failure in all of these areas.
Mm-hmm.
And I realize, despite all of that, we have come so far.
Mm-hmm. Yep. It's a journey. I want to get a little philosophical here. To your point about the number of points of failure that you could possibly have, it's a miracle anything actually gets done, or it's divinely inspired or spiritually driven or whatever pick your outside of human entity.
But I just think that we've done very well.
Absolutely.
And we need to be a little easier on ourselves around the failure points.
Well, I've seen the meme that I think is going around LinkedIn a lot lately. It seems to show up where, you have they look like blocks or bricks, and they're just labeled failure. And it shows how sometimes a person is buried in their failure kind of thing. And then the next little slide is, you're building steps essentially, and you build on your failures to achieve whatever success you're looking for, kind of thing. And, one of my own personal mantras is that the only failure is not learning from it. So, to your point, that's how we've been able to grow and evolve and innovate and really increase the quality of the information that's being provided, the quality of the design of the clinical trials, the robustness of the data and the integrity of the data that's being provided and evaluated. And the innovation that we were talking earlier about, like 96 well plates kind of thing, where you go from 1 to 96 in an instant kind of thing. Those things just make it so much faster, which means we can provide so much more and different options, at the bedside.
Yes, absolutely. Well, thank you for joining us today while we talk about failure. We really appreciate you being here. If you have any questions or comments, please feel free to reach out to us at www.metisconsultingservices.com. And we'll see you next time.
Thanks, Michelleanne.
Thanks, Jen.
Thank you for listening to the Queens of Quality podcast. To continue the conversation, please follow our LinkedIn profile, Metis Consulting Services, or for additional resources, visit our website at metisconsultingservices.com. You can listen to the show free anywhere you find podcasts. Love the show? Don't forget to subscribe, like, review, and share with others. Thank you again for listening, and we will see you next time.